Today for Cornerstone is a challenging commitment for an opportunity that we're calling Move the Mountain. We believe that God is calling us into some unique places that require some unique funding. And to get there, we believe that we can do it all together. And so we are having a commitment service today. As you came in today, you were probably given a commitment card that talked about that. And ultimately, it really is about setting ourselves up together as we pursue these kinds of initiatives in the community, not just for this church and keeping lights and programs moving, but really, like, we're not talking about 2024. The big conversation for Cornerstone as a whole and where we've been the last few weeks really is a conversation for 2030, 2040, 2050. How do we get there and be the lighthouse that God has called us to be in this community? I've said this the last few weeks as I've thought about like where we are, this dynamic of the heart and soul of the Christian faith and the reason for this series. I thought to myself with some of the issues we've been kind of wrestling with and thinking through, and inspired by Paul, as Paul is leaving the Ephesian church. He had helped plant that church. He had been there. We see this in the book of Acts. And there's this one particular message where he's meeting with the leadership of Ephesus. And you have to keep in mind like how this has unfolded. Paul spent about 5 years in Ephesus. We never see him spend that kind of time in any other location of all the churches he helped start. But he would keep going back to Ephesus. He was there for an extended time, made tents and worked on construction while he was there, preaching the gospel, helping to build and equip the church. So he helped start one of the most influential churches in the ancient world. He stayed long enough to invest in the people. And then he felt like there was this need to move. And before he moved back to Jerusalem, because his passion was to get the gospel to Rome, before he moved back, he had this incredible conversation with their leadership. And he challenged them. And then after he got to Rome, Paul's going to end up in jail. All these things where people were fearful for his life, fearful he was going to be arrested. All that happened. He will eventually die for his faith in Rome. All these things set up. Before he does that, he writes the letter to the Ephesians. He writes the letter to the Colossians, which goes to the Ephesians also. And then Paul will write his best disciple, if you would, his closest, most dear follower that he brought up in the faith, Timothy. He sends Timothy to Ephesus and then writes Timothy while he's there to encourage the work in that community. Paul loved the Ephesian church. And he had these opening words and these last words. And I thought to myself, if I were starting a brand new church in any community, or if I was leaving a church, which that's not the premise of this message today, what was the most important things we could say in either of those settings? And so the first week of July, we wrestled with the heart of the Christian faith. And that dynamic really gets down to giving. Like when we give, when we live generously, we live more out the character of God than any other time in our lives. You think about who God is, and from the very beginning, whether it's power or it's voice or it's structure, God is giving. Even when Adam and Eve dishonor and disobey, he blesses them, even though they don't deserve it. He gives to them to provide for them. And then we hear this beautiful statement that is seen all over the world in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. And not just gave anything, not just like gave leftovers, gave his choicest of gifts. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And then last week, we talked about the soul of the Christian faith. The soul of the Christian faith being service. Jesus would say it himself, for I didn't come to be served, but to serve others and to give my life a ransom for many. In that conversation, the ancient world, those Jews who were following Jesus, his disciples, and the crowds he would meet, they expected some messianic figure to show up, deliver them from Rome, and reestablish their kingdom, unite the separated kingdoms, and make Israel a great nation again. God had bigger plans. He had bigger plans than just reuniting the kingdom. He had plans to reunite all of creation back to himself through Jesus. Not just conquering the Roman Empire, but through Jesus conquering sin and death. And Jesus came to serve. And he says if we're going to be like him, we have to serve too. That the greatest among you is the one who serves all. So serving is the heart of the Christian faith. And if we came back to, where does that put us today, is the dynamic of Christian faith. And I want to talk about this from the perspective of the New Testament. We'll go into the Old a little bit as well today. But in the conversation, this dynamic of faith, Christian faith, isn't just haphazard belief. There's all kinds of things you can believe in. How many of you are football fans in the audience today? Yeah, practice is starting, right? Your favorite teams have got all their players together, and they're all starting, and every one of you thinks your team's going to win the Super Bowl. But we all know better. My favorite team's going to win the Super Bowl. No, they are known for disappointing their fans. That's what my favorite team is known for. Disappointing their fans. All the bells and all the whistles through the regular season, and they hang it up in the postseason. We are in the middle of an election season. I'm not going 90 minutes today, just so you know. No record-breaking sermon times today. I don't care which politician you vote for, they're going to let you down. There was a number of black women voters run an organization, and they challenged Vice President Kamala Harris that if you were to replace Biden on the ticket, would you fulfill these promises? And she says the most honest thing I've ever heard a politician say. She says, well, lots of things are said during elections, but when it actually comes time for it, you follow the money of the supporters. And I was like, well, at least she's honest. Every politician will disappoint you. There's a whole lot of things you can believe in. Christian faith is not haphazard belief. Jesus never intended people to say, I think I'll believe this and hang out for a little while and let everybody else do something about it. Jesus had a very different vision of what faith means and what belief means. For Jesus, belief and faith always leveled with concrete response. It wasn't just something to talk about. It wasn't something to just think about. It was something that intended a concrete response in everyday living. Jesus says this in Mark chapter 8. Mark is a fast-moving book. If you read it, it's like this action-packed. If you understood Greek, you would know it's constantly moving and pushing forward with the verbs that it uses. And Jesus has been in a private conversation with his most immediate disciples, the 12. And in this conversation, he asks his disciples, who do you think that I am? And who does the world say that I am around us? And everybody has an answer about who they think Jesus is. The same thing as today, right? Everybody has an answer about who they think Jesus is. And they would say, some say you're John the Baptist come back because John had been beheaded. Others say you're Elijah. And yet some would still say you're a prophet. And Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? And then there's this guy, Peter. Peter is one of his disciples. Peter is known for speaking first, thinking second. It's kind of what he's known for. But he's watched Jesus. And he has seen Jesus raise the dead, calm a storm, feed 5,000, probably 13,000, but 5 is what's counted. He's watched him cast out demons, heal sick, dead people are alive, saw it with his own mother-in-law. And he goes through these things, and Peter goes, you're the Christ. You're the exact one we've been waiting for. And Jesus will tell him, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but the Spirit did. And then Jesus goes on to talk about his death and resurrection. And after he finishes that, it says he calls everybody to him. So he's having this private conversation with his crew, and then he brings everybody in. And while everybody's listening, having just talked about being the Messiah and affirming that with his disciples, having predicted his death and talked about what that death and resurrection was going to look like, now he brings everybody together, and this is what Jesus says. Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 24, it says, calling the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone wants to follow after me. Okay, so anyone who wants to follow Jesus. That anyone there is a wide open invitation. It's not limited. Anybody who wants to follow me, this is what you have to do. Let them deny himself right off the top. The precursor to following Jesus is denying yourself. Let him deny himself. Take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. For what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world, yet lose his life? What can anyone give in exchange for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of when he comes into his glory with his Father and the holy angels. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom come to power. What an incredible statement for Jesus to make. Most of the time, when we start talking about this passage, the thing we most get hung up on is the cross we have to carry. And it's even become its own cliche, right? This is just the cross I have to bear. Yet the whole precursor isn't taking up the cross, it's denying yourself. Like lining my life up to Jesus. So we talk about this like for Christians, like true Christian faith at the heart of Christianity, at the soul of Christianity, is committed faith. Again, it's not haphazard belief. It's not a religious crutch that gets you through hard times. I was talking with someone about marriage the other day, and they're just in this really desperate situation, and they said, Pastor, I just can't keep clinging to my vows. I need something more. And I said, that's the tension. Your vows aren't what you hold on to, they're what you're standing on. Your vows are the foundation of your marriage, which you can firmly plant your feet when everything else is going crazy. So make vows meaningful. Like when we talk about faith, faith isn't what we hold on to when the world falls to pieces. It's actually what we stand on while the world crumbles. We stand on faith. If it's haphazard belief, you ever been in a bouncy house? Like this is going to be hard to believe, but I was small once. Right? I mean, that's a stretch for some people. But when I was in kindergarten, now I was bigger than all the other kindergartners, but I was smaller than the sixth graders, and because I was bigger than the kindergartners, I could only go in the bounce house with the sixth graders. Sixth graders are ruthless, especially when you're a kindergartner. And I had never been in the bounce house before, and I got in the bounce house, and I thought I was going to jump, and all of a sudden, these sixth graders start like double bouncing me. And I lost my footing, and the next thing you know, I'm just on the bouncer, and I'm just flying and tumbling and flying and tumbling. And I had no place to put my feet, and I just cried. I felt completely helpless. That's haphazard belief. Haphazard belief just bounces you everywhere. Committed faith is concrete. You lock your feet onto it, and it doesn't fall out from under you. And that's what Jesus talks about when he talks about faith. That's the kind of faith that Jesus is intending when he says, follow me. It's not a kind of faith that shudders and bends. It's not a faith that's going to leave you. It's a faith that's going to sustain you. And that's really where Jesus is talking. If God is not the center of your life, something else is. And there is nothing in this world that is rooted in the foundations of eternity other than Jesus. So why would I align my life with anything else? That's the question we have to ask. Like, we're in a crazy situation right now in the world. Like, the whole thing is flipped upside down when you watch it. And this isn't intended to strike fear. This is just reality. Like, one software patch shuts down the whole transit situation. 77 businesses in the Twin Cities couldn't operate over the weekend because of a software patch. But our technology is supposed to be set, right? We've got people arguing about who can be president and who can't be president. We got to get Biden off the ticket. We can't let Trump speak for 90 minutes. I've watched Christian friends say crazy stuff about Trump being shot in his right ear and how biblical that is. I'm like, be quiet. Y'all making stuff up now. It's terrible. Last weekend was terrible. No matter what you think about politics, last weekend was terrible. But don't make stuff up. Put God at the center of your life. Because if he's not, something else is. There's a story Jesus tells about a man who cleans up his whole house. It had evil spirits in it, and he cleans his house, and he doesn't put anything in it. And what they mean by that is not like new furniture from IKEA. They mean like a spiritual calling over it. The man did nothing to take care of the presence, cleans his house, and then it's filled, it says, with even more demonic presence than ever before. Why would Jesus tell that story? If God is at the center of your life, something else will be. In the Christian faith, as it's intended, everything is supposed to be centered on God. Not politics, not country, not family, not anything else. God first. Period. This is committed faith. And so we start to unpack this. Like, Solomon says this blessing so beautifully. Like, he is in a situation, his dad, Solomon, is a king of Israel. His dad was David. David longed to build the temple for God. There was no temple in Jerusalem at this point, historically. David wanted to build the house. Yet every time we turn around with King David, yes, King David, who God made the promise to, someone of your line will always be on the throne. That same David was an adulterer, a murderer, a warmonger, a cheater. So much blood on his hand. God says, you can't build my house. But I'll let your son build my house. So Solomon gets to build the temple. He's tasked with this as Prince Solomon. When you become king, you're going to build the temple. God's already declared it. So the temple is being dedicated, and on the day that that temple is dedicated, the Lord speaks to Solomon, and then Solomon speaks over the people, and towards the end of this beautiful prayer that is being declared that day, Solomon says, and may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God. This is in the same passage. You hear this like we're in election season, and I promise you, if you click on evangelicalpolitics.com or whatever that could be, you're going to see a verse from this passage that says something like this: if my people would humble themselves and pray. That comes from the same passage that we're talking about right now. And Solomon's going to conclude that conversation, that prayer with the people and God, kind of living in a priestly role, even though he's king. In that role, he says, and may your hearts, this is his blessing over them, may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God. The Hebrew word for fully committed is lacking nothing. That everything that you can is being put forward into relationship with God. May that be the kind of people that we are. And so he lays this out, right? You cannot be a part-time Christian. Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross. Like the hardest thing with most of the answers in the world today is they go, fulfill yourself, satisfy yourself, look into yourself, answer all your problems from yourself. And Jesus goes, the greatest answer to the problem you can have is to follow me. How do you get there? Deny yourself. Completely countercultural. And yet we want to live like this part-time faith. Like, we can't, if you believe in Jesus, turn the Jesus off. There's no button in your soul that turns the Jesus off. When you're living life with Christ and you are indwelt by His Spirit, that's what the Scripture says, that when we believe in Jesus, the Spirit of God lives in us. You can tell the Spirit to be quiet. You can ignore what the Spirit is doing, but you can't turn it off. You can walk away and do all kinds of things opposite of Christian faith, but you can't turn the Spirit off. And Jesus is actually challenging us, going, you cannot be a part-time Christian. You cannot be Christian here, but not over there. Everywhere you go, you have to follow me. And that's this tension of commitment. I was with my real estate agent the other day, and he got really frustrated, and he swore. And the first thing he does is he apologizes because he knows I'm a pastor. Oh, I didn't mean that. No, you did mean it. Like, you're mad. I can see that. Process your emotions. And if you got to apologize to someone, you should deal with Jesus on that, not me. And he just kind of looked at me. I'm like, who did you really offend just now? He said, oh, I never thought of that before. Well, think about it. And then let's get on with this. You cannot turn it off. When do you turn it off? I'll follow Jesus when it's convenient for me. You can't take up your own cross in issues of convenience. Do you know how inconvenient the cross is? Just to carry that thing? I mean, you are strapped. You've got it tied to your back like giant ropes attached to a beam that weighs twice your body weight. And you're just going to casually drop it to the side on occasion? When it's actually just latched to your body, there's no way to drop it. You can't turn it off. The commitment that Jesus calls for is a whole life commitment. And every single day, like, I said this before, but for me, I have said yes to Jesus, and I believe that my eternal position is secure in Him. But do you know what I have to do most moments of my life? Re-say yes to Jesus every moment. Because there are some moments when I don't want to say yes to Jesus. I actually had this conversation with myself yesterday. I watched this guy zigzag through traffic, cut my daughter off, cut me off, cut someone else off. And I was like, if I was the kind of person who gave people the finger, this is my real thought. But I'm not. So I won't. I was so frustrated in that driving moment yesterday. Real-time conversation. That was the thought in my head. If I was the kind of person who did this, I would. But since I'm not, I won't. And it all got down to not what they thought about me, but what I thought about Jesus. That's what the whole center point got down to. Not what will Jesus think about me. Jesus knows I'm a sinner, and He died for me. And He rose again for me. But do I think highly enough of Him to be committed in all situations? I had to process that yesterday. Sometimes I fail at that. Sometimes I win. But I'm always having to ask myself, am I committing to Jesus in this? Jesus says the greatest commandment we can live out of all the commandments is to love God with all of our heart, our mind, our soul, and our strength. That everything we have is aimed at loving God well. That's committed faith. A life totally committed to God has nothing to fear, nothing to lose, nothing to regret. I was in a conversation with someone recently, and they asked me, what's my biggest regret in ministry? Ooh. Let me think about that one. And I thought. And I came up with one. I don't have many, to be quite frank. But I thought of one. And it goes back to the first position I took coming out of seminary. We had a family of 4. We worked for a church part-time, just graduated seminary, and we could really use a full-time income. We loved that little church, and they loved us tremendously. And we left that church to go work full-time. As much as we were still in great relationship, they closed 2 years ago, but the people there we're still in great relationship with. That's where our mentor Greg, who I'm pretty certain saved our marriage and future, came from. And we cried, like we wept all the way to Memphis, Tennessee, 6.5 hours. And at the gut of it was, I think we just left our home for a paycheck. And at the same time, that's what we had studied for and worked for and longed for and prayed for, and that was the aim, right? Like who goes and gets a business degree and then weeps going into their first job? Like, yeah, man, I'm about to get paid. And it was just different. And it was like one of those pieces that kind of marked our soul and went, I'm never doing that again. Even though we have a good relationship with that church and those friends, I went, I'm never doing that again. And you take these pieces, right? Like Psalm 112 says of those who are committed to the Lord, they will have no fear of bad news. Not just no regret. Like if you're pursuing Jesus and you're living your life under him, and that's that order of I am committing to you in each decision, there's no regret doing the right thing. There's no regret following Jesus. He is the better way. And so you come out, he says, there will be no fear of bad news. Could you imagine living that life? No fear of bad news. Your hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. But where does it anchor down to? It anchors down to trusting God. Like the whole thing anchors right there. No fear of bad news. Your hearts are steadfast. You're trusting in the Lord. That's where it is. When Jesus talks about having an abundant life, most of the people I meet with on a daily basis, when we're counseling and wrestling with things, we're peeling back layers of regret and hurt. We're dealing with the uncertainty of tomorrow. What if this happens? What if that happens? And yet there's this place where it's like the psalmist isn't ignoring the trouble of life. He's not saying you won't have bad news or have bad things. He's saying the position of your soul is going to be locked down with the Lord. You've got no fear of it. Jesus says, in this world, you will face trouble, but I've overcome the world. So where do we lean? To the trouble of the world or to the one who overcomes? Doesn't mean we won't have trouble, but to have no fear of it, that's a great place to be. And this is what the restoring, renewing, abundant life-giving gospel does. It's powerful. This is what we talk about. So what does it mean for the church today? I want to go through some things. Like, I've been wrestling with the staff on this, and I said, we come with these things like we hear so much the great defaithing of the church or unsizing the church, trying to make it smaller, or the idea of deconstructing faith. The church has been under no no worse attack, even from inside, than it is. Even what happened at the Reformation with Luther wasn't intended to split the church. Luther's call was for discussion. Luther's call was for recentering on Jesus. And a whole lot went wrong with a whole lot of people after that. But the call was to get right. Like, we're in a unique season that maybe we haven't paid attention to enough. So I want to walk through some things. Contemporary American Christianity, that's where we live today. Contemporary American Christianity faces unique challenges that are different from the global faith community. There's other things happening in other countries that's kind of unique in America versus them. Doesn't make us better or worse. We have to pay attention to our unique challenges, right? I have a friend who just stayed with us from India. The last time I went to India was the year before I moved here. That year, you could still pretty openly do a lot of ministry. My friend comes, he says, in the last 5 years since you haven't been, most of our work has moved underground from government persecution and radicalized Hinduism. They've had to move underground to keep the church growing. We don't necessarily face that today. We have a whole different realm of tensions, right? One of those tensions is like, as church leaders, and maybe this is true in your business worlds as well, your personal lives, is we're taught how to lead toward a goal. Like, everything that we learn in college and leadership books and all these kinds of things, no matter what platform, they teach you how to lead toward a goal. No one ever taught us how to lead from a crisis. You may experience that in your own workplaces. Leading from a crisis and leading toward a goal are two very different things. Both are leadership, but how you go about leading is different. When you're leading toward a goal, the biggest obstacles you face are presumptions about how we're going to accomplish the goal or how good we're already doing, and traditions. Presumptions are kind of like facts, but they're not quite facts. It's not quite truth. It's presumptions. We think this. We're going to lead toward that. And traditions really, like when you try to lead and do something new, you try to start something new and people respond emotionally, they're attached to traditions. Traditions lead our emotional dynamics and our emotional charges when it comes to going somewhere new. And you'll hear stuff, we've never done it that way before, or this is the way we've always done it. That's how you lead towards a goal. You have to overcome presumptions and traditions. When you lead from a crisis, it's about feelings and foundations. To where traditions may be the second tension toward a goal, feelings are right at the forefront. Like, you don't feel safe. You don't feel secure in the world. You don't feel secure in your job. You don't feel secure in your politics. You don't feel secure in your country. You're going to have some issues. You don't feel secure in the economy. I haven't talked to anybody who feels secure in those things. And so that level of leading from a crisis, and I'm talking about the beginning with COVID crisis, dealing with the racial crisis, and now the political, like what we're seeing in a divided country is just the response of something that was already there that the crisis revealed. But we were so quick to try to normalize the world, to move back to presumptions and traditions, that we missed helping people through the crisis. When you lead from a crisis, you have to deal with feelings first. And rather than sitting back on traditions and presumptions, you have to go back to foundations of truth. We didn't do that as a country, as a group of faith, and maybe even as Cornerstone. We were pretty quick to want to get back to the way things were. Does that make sense? And so this is a problem in the world today when it comes to church and commitment in Jesus. One of the issues that we face is historically, the church was formed out of gospel presence in a community, but today community is sought from church, who then hopes to perform gospel presence in people. We flipped it. The way it used to be, I don't mean like the good old days, but you can see this, like movements of the Spirit, and it still happens globally. There's a community of people someone shows up in that community, loves those people, presents the gospel, and out of that, churches form. And they create spaces. Today, there are churches who try to invite you into community so that the gospel can be present. It's a completely flipped model from how even the New Testament shows how churches were started. Completely flipped model. Like, if we don't start with a love for the community and a need for gospel presence, a church shouldn't form. Because the church ultimately is about being God's witness in a lost and dying world. Not about being a community and a community center for people who love Jesus together. It's a gathering place and it's a people. It's both. You want to learn more about church? Come to the Tuesday Bible study. A lot of fun going on there. A lot of good engagement. But we flipped that model. That's a challenge. People want relationship without relationship. Catch that. How many people in your life can you actually just walk through the mud with? I want to have friends and be friendly, but I don't want to be real. I want to keep it at a certain level where my life is, and we wrestle with that. Like, our lives are so socially curated to really inspire or experience life change. We put all just the right pictures on social media. We put just the right things so that our family looks great. We had a friend that if you watched their social media profile, you would have thought they had the greatest life ever. And then out of the blue, divorce, crazy situation, and then you talk to the person, and they were like, it was going on the whole time. I just didn't know how to get help. So I put this image of the family I wanted based on pictures that I had. Like, our lives are so socially curated. We're not real. When we live real, we actually inspire and experience life change. And that's part of what the church is intended to be, is a place of real, right? Where sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes can come to know Jesus. That's part of it. It's supposed to be real, where people who believe in Jesus can share in each other's sufferings. That's actually a commanded verse, to share in each other's suffering. But when we curate our lives, we can't share that with each other. When everything's just good and fine all the time, we can't live into the command to bear one another's burdens. And we actually deny grace from each other at that level. People want connection without commitment. We want to be in the know. We want to have freedom so we don't have FOMO. Again, dating myself a little bit. We don't use that word so much today. Like fear of missing out. And so we don't commit to anything because I'm waiting for the next best thing to happen. The greatest thing to happen's already happened. It's Jesus. And in every avenue of a miscurated, socially ill, longing for real relationship life, Jesus is that bridge. He invites us to himself and to something real. By giving ourselves to lesser things so that we can feel normal, the broader church missed out on displaying hope in the world. I happen to believe that through Jesus' mission and his vision for the church, that the local church is still the hope for the world today. Jesus is the hope extended through his people. Just because you missed the boat doesn't mean you can't catch up to it. You know what I'm saying? And I think this is a season where we can catch up to the boat for our community. When we talk about this, like Cornerstone, we have to live fully committed to Jesus, committed to his community and the community in which he's planted us. That's significant. 2017, Cornerstone moved to this location, and there's an intentional purpose for being here. What we do with that purpose, that's on us. But God relocated this church to this property for a reason. What do we do with it? How do we live it? Committed to Christ, to his community, and the community where he planted us. We have to be good news people in bad news times. And the world has felt in a very bad news time for some time. The weight of the last 4 years. And if we can live into that witness, that's why I say the call to commitment today isn't a commitment to get through the year. It's a commitment for 2030, 2040, 2050. That's what we're looking at. Because I believe God has put us in this place for a particular reason, to bless a particular people at a particular time. And that's what the challenge really is about.